Hello everyone. Today we will be going to discuss about postcolonialism. And my groupmates is Norilyn V. Vicosan, Ansharina A. Kaanawan, Ramila A. Pagsol, Mercy P. Laureta, and Vanessa Agalpas. And our topic will be going to discuss about the background of postcolonialism, its historical development, assumptions, methodology, questions for analysis, and critics and responses. So now we are now on the background of postcolonialism. So the 1960s saw a revolutionary change in literary theory. They say that one correct interpretation of a text could be discovered if critical readers follow the prescribed methodology asserted by the new critics. New critics paid little attention to text in historical context or to the feelings, beliefs, and ideas of a text readers. A text's meanings is inextricably bound to ambiguity, irony, and paradox found within the structure of the text itself. By analyzing the text alone, new critics believe that an astute critic can identify a text's central paradox and explain how the text ultimately resolved that paradox while also supporting the text's overarching theme. Jacques Derrida, a philosopher and literary critic, he insists on questioning what parts not only on the text but also the reader and the author play in the interpretative process. Because Derrida and other like-minded critics chronologically come after modernity and the reign of structuralism in literary theory, they are referred to as postmoderns or post-structuralists. Recently, the term post-test critics is being used to denote these postmodern thinkers. These philosopher critics, Jonathan Colin J., Hills Miller, Barbara Johnson, to name a few, also question the language of text and of literary analysis. Unlike the new critics, who believe that the language of literature is somehow different from the language of science and everyday conversation, these postmoderns insist that the language text is not distinct from the language used to analyze such a writing. For them, language is a discourse. So in other words, the discourse or culturally bound language of ideas used in literary analysis helps shape and form the text being analyzed. We cannot separate, they maintain the text and the language used to critique. So for these critics, language helps create and shape what we call objective reality. Believing that objective reality can be created by language, many postmodernists assert that all reality is social construct. From this point of view, no single or primary objective reality exists. Instead, many realities exist. In this avowing a universal objective reality, these critics believe that reality is perspectival, with each individual creating his or her subjective understanding of the reality itself. Then, there are questions such as how then do we come to agree upon public and social concerns such as values, ethics, and the common good if reality is different from each other? The answer is that for these postmodern thinkers is that each society or culture contains within itself a dominant cultural group who determines the culture's ideology, or using the Marxist term, its hegemony, that is dominant values, its sense of right and wrong, and its sense of personal self-worth. All people in a given culture are consciously and unconsciously asked to conform to the prescribed hegemony. What happens when there's one ideas, thinking, and personal background does not conform? Well, the traditional answer already has been articulated by the dominated class and its accompanying hegemony. Silence. Live quietly, work quietly, and think quietly. The message sent to those others by the dominant culture has been clear and consistent. Conform and be quiet, deny yourself, and all will be well. But many has not been quiet. Writers and thinkers such as Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Carlos Fuentes, Gayatri Spivak, Edward Said, Franz Fanon, and Judith Butler, to name a few, had dared to speak out and challenge the dominating culture and the dictates this culture's decree. They continue to refuse silence and choose defiance if necessary. They believe that individuals' view of life and of ethics really matters. They assert a different perspective, a vantage point not of the dominant culture but one from which to view the world and its peoples. They speak for one culture but many, not one cultural perspective but a host, not one interpretation of life but countless. In Great Britain, the terms cultural criticism and cultural studies are often used interchangeably. In America, cultural criticism primarily focuses on textual analysis or other artistic forms, whereas cultural studies refers to a much broader, interdisciplinary study of literary and artistic forms analyzed in their social, economic, or political context. Often referred to as subaltern writers, a term used by Marxist critic Antonio Gramsci to refer to those classes who are not in control of culture's ideology or hegemony. These theories, authors, critics provide new ways to see and understand the cultural forces at work in society, in literature, and in ourselves. In postcolonialism, either spelling is acceptable, but each represents slightly different theoretical assumptions. Consists of a set of theories and philosophy and various approaches to literary analysis that are concerned with literature written in English in countries that were or still are colonies of other countries. So, for the most part, postcolonial studies exclude literature that represents either British or American viewpoints and concentrate on writings from colonized or formerly colonized cultures in Australia, New Zealand, Africa, South America, and other places that were once dominated by but remained outside the white male European cultural, political, and philosophical tradition. In early its development, postcolonialism was referred to as Third World or Commonwealth. Literature terms present-day critics dub pejorative. What postcolonialism and postcolonial theorists do is to investigate what happens when two cultures clash and one of them, with its accessories, ideology, empowers and deems itself superior to the other.
Everyone. Today, I'd like to discuss the concept of postcolonialism, a field of study that examines the long-lasting impact of colonialism on cultures around the world. So before we delve into the specifics, let's briefly revisit the historical context that gave rise to postcolonialism. Coli- for centuries, Western powers like Great Britain engaged in colonialism, establishing control over vast regions of Africa and Asia. And this involved exploiting resources, exerting political power, and often imposing cultural norms on the colonized people. The colonizers often viewed themselves as superior, leading to unfair treatment and the marginalization of colonized population. The 20th century witnessed a significant shift as many colonized countries began to achieve independence through decolonization movements. This historical turning point coincided with the rise of postcolonialism as a critical field of study. Scholars and writers started to examine the profound and lasting impacts of colonialism on the cultures, societies, and psyches of formerly colonized nations. Pioneering thinkers like Franz Fanon, whose influential book Black Skin, White Mask in 1952 explored the psychological effects of colonialism on colonized people, played a crucial role in shaping post-colonial thought. And other prominent figures like Edward Said's Orientalism 1978 challenged the Eurocentric view of the world and exposed the power dynamic embedded in colonial discourse.
So, what does postcolonialism study? Postcolonialism looks at the social, political, and economic effects of colonialism on formerly colonized countries. So, when we say colonized countries, these are the occupied or conquered countries by a foreign country. For example, is the Philippines conquered by the Spanish and the American. And next, post-colonialism explores how these countries are still affected by their colonial past. So, for example, as Filipinos are still good in speaking in English because our ancestors have shown how to fluently speak this language because before when we were colonized by the American there was no Tagalog speaking, so this might be passed from the people who experience it to the next generation, so that is why we are still good at it. And post-colonialism also examines topics like cultural identity, our identity before and during after the colonialism era, and the resistance to colonial rules. So, of course, when we are colonized, we are forced to follow a rule. For example, the Polo y Servicio and the Encomienda, which was resisted by our ancestors before. By the way, those Polo y Servicio and the Encomienda was the rule of Spaniards before. Post-colonialism also examine topics like literature and writing from formerly colonized regions. So when we observe writings, it is also affected by histories or the surroundings of a writer. So we can differentiate the writing of people from Cebu and Manila and from Baguio and other parts of the countries because their surroundings affect them on what to write or on how to write it. And the ongoing influence of colonization is also examined under the post-colonialism. So when we say ongoing influence of colonization, this is the speaking in English and the cuisines that the colonizers has brought in our country are still practiced up to date. And the key terms here is when we say post-colonial, this refers to the period after colonialism or ongoing effects of colonialism. And when we say subaltern, this is a group with less power or social standing, often referring to colonized peoples. We also have different approaches in post-colonialism. Some see it as diverse methods to analyze colonialism impact. Others see it as a set of cultural strategies focused on history, like Edward Said's work. And there's also a debate about whether it refers to the time after independence or entire period from colonization to the present. So those are the debates. But on top of those, post-colonialism helps us understand the complex ways on how colonialism continues to shape the world even after colonies gain independence. It gives voice to those who were colonized and examines how they respond to the lasting effects of that experience. So that's all from me. Thank you for listening.
Okay, let's move on to the assumptions in postcolonialism, wherein there are different culture that have been subverted, conquered, and it is often removed from history, respond to the conquering culture in diverse ways. So in postcolonialism, there is no single approach to postcolonial theory and practice is possible or even preferable. So in postcolonial criticism, Nicholas Harrison asserts in Theory and the Work of Fiction. It is happened 2003. Postcolonial theory identifiable type of theory in the same sense as deconstruction, Marxism, psychoanalysis, or feminism. Harrison is just like many other critics theorists, wherein he sees no point in talking as if consensus about what postcolonial studies is might eventually emerge. We can, however, highlight postcolonialism major concerns. All the postcolonialist critics, they believe that number one, European colonialism did occur. Number two, the British Empire was at the center of the colonialism. Number three, the conquerors dominated not only the physical land but also the hegemony or ideology of colonized people. And lastly, the social, political, and economic effects of such colonization are still being felt today. While at the center of postcolonial theory, it exists an inherent tension among three categories of postcolonialists. Number one, those who have been academically trained and living in the West. Number two, those who were raised in non Western cultures but now reside in the West. Number three, those subaltern writers writing in non Western cultures. The best example here are Frederick Jameson and George M. Gogelberger. They come from European and American cultural, literary, and scholarly background. While Spivak, Said, and Baba were raised in non-Western cultures but have or now reside, study, and write in West. Ahmad would live in subaltern cultures. Differing theoretical and practical criticism develop in among these three groups. Out of this underlying tension among the group, postcolonial theories and critics have and will continue to discover problematic topics for exploration debate. And Franz Fanon in 1925 to 1961, he was the earliest postcolonial theorist. He was born in French colony of Martinique. He also fought with the French in World War II. He remained in France after the war to study psychiatry and medicine. Black Skin and White Mask is his influential text throughout his short career and life. He provides these two influential texts. While the wretch of the earth, he uses this as a psychoanalytic theory to examine the condition of the black under French colonial rule as a result of colonialism.
Postcolonialism refers to the study and analysis of literature and culture from the perspective of the former colonies and the impact of colonization. It uses a various of approaches that analyze texts and this includes the following. First is deconstruction. This seeks to expose and challenge the underlying assumptions and binary oppositions in text, likewise in questioning and the power of dynamics and hierarchies embedded in colonial narratives. Next is feminism. So this approach focuses on the gendered aspects of colonialism, and this explores how women's experiences and perspectives have been marginalized or silenced in colonial discourse. So the third one is Marxism. So this approach examines the economic and class dimensions of colonialism. This analyzes how colonial powers exploited and oppressed the colonized peoples for economic gain. The last one is reader oriented. This approach emphasizes the role of the reader in interpreting and understanding texts, like in considering how readers from different cultural backgrounds may bring their own perspectives and experiences to the reading process. Writing back of those who have experienced colonial oppression to the colonizers and the world. So, writing back refers to the act of responding and challenging the colonizers and the dominant narratives of colonialism. And this involves giving voice to the experiences and perspectives of those who have been oppressed by colonization and sharing their own stories and critiques with the colonizers and the wider world. So next is how post-colonial criticism is actually put into practice, thus depends strongly on the critics' individual theoretical commitments. So this practice of post-colonial criticism varies depending on the individual theoretical commitments of the critics. Uh, each critic may employ different approaches and methodologies based on their own beliefs and perspectives. But all post-colonial criticism is united in its opposition to colonial and neo-colonial hegemonies and is concerned with the best ways to create a just and true decolonized culture and literature. So all post-colonial criticism shares a common aim of opposing colonial and neo-colonial hegemonies. This is concerned with creating a just and true decolonized culture and literature by challenging and subverting the dominant narratives and power structures of colonialism.
Okay, let's move on to the next slides, the critiques and response. Postcolonialism is not a homogeneous school of literary theory and criticism, but a loosely defined set of theories and methodologies that seeks to uncover and discover what happens to the colonized once they have conquered by the colonizers. It means post-colonialism explores how colonized people, us, we are colonized by the Spanish, Americans, and Japanese as well. Post-colonialism explores how colonized people are affected by colonization, focusing on culture, identity, and society. Its main focus is understanding the experience of colonized peoples after colonization. It seeks to uncover the impacts of colonization on culture, identity, and society. Next one, post-colonialism chiefly deals with literature that has been written by colonized in colonized countries. Examples is our own country. Postcolonialism examines the cultural, social, and political impacts of colonization, especially through the lens of literature written by those who are colonized. It explores how colonization shapes identities, power, power dynamics, and narratives within these societies. By focusing on literature, from colonized countries, post-colonialism seeks to understand and critique the legacy of col- colonialism and the experiences of those affected by it. To the next slide. Post-colonialism. It aims to examine what has been missing from literary analysis by highlighting the interests of colonized and destructive forces of colonizers' hegemony as force on the colonized. These statements talk about analyzing literature in a way that pays attention to the viewpoints of colonized people, which are usually ignored. It's about understanding how colonial powers controlled and oppressed colonized societies through their dominance. For example, is the novel of Jose Rizal. Jose Rizal. Through him, through that novel, it focused on the perspective of Dr. Jose Rizal of the Filipino characters way back then during the colonizations of Spanish. Characters and the destructive impact of uh, that book contains about that books and the characters in that novel is about this is talk about the destructive impact of Spanish colonization. Next one is in its methodology, it gives authority and presence to the other who have to the other people who have become the separate ones and who stand apart from the dominant colonizing culture. This statement likely refers to a theoretical framework or social critique that values perspective and experiences of marginalized or oppressed groups, often referred to as the other. It suggests acknowledging the existence and importance of those who are marginalized by dominant culture norms or power structures, giving them authority and recognizing their presence in society. This approach aims to challenge and deconstruct system of oppression and colonizing by centering the voice and experiences of those who are typically sidelined or silenced. Postcolonialism and its goal is to win back a place in history of colonized, enhancing or enhancing all readers to value the many different kinds of cultures and peoples who inhabit the earth. So this statement talks about the goal is to make sure that history of colonized people gets recognized and appreciated. It's about celebrating the diversity of cultures worldwide and making sure everyone knows about in it in history books. Some books are nakapaloob yung mga nangyari during sa Spanish colonizers, Americans as well as Japanese. May mga books na nandun lahat ng mga experience ng mga kapwa natin Pilipino noon. So next one is other critics observe that postcolonial student remains situated in academia in the upper classes of society, having little or no effect on real people in real places. This criticism says that postcolonialism studies, even though it's popular in academia, universities, schools, doesn't really make a difference in the lives of regular people na hindi nga naman nila na-experience or hindi nga din naman natin na-experience kung paano na-colonize yung mga ninuno natin before, right? This idea stresses, I'm sorry, it means it focus only on the theory might not help. Yes, it mean it focuses on theory but not might help people dealing with effects of colonial history in different places. So, kagaya nga ng sinabi ko kanina, pinag-aaralan natin kung paano na-colonize yung mga ninuno natin before, pero hindi natin na-experience. So, parang, when we are inside the classroom or in academic purposes, natututo tayo kung ano yung nangyari sa kanila. But kapag nakalabas na tayo sa school, walang nangyayari. Parang alam lang natin but ilan lang siguro yung mga nakaka-appreciate or nakikita in real world yung colonization. Natututo lang yung iba pero hindi na-appreciate kung ano ba yung nangyari, kung ano ba yung pagbabago na naidulot ng colonization. Next slide. Postcolonialism must therefore seek to empower those who have been stripped of power, dignity, and self-worth. Maintain some critics rather than continually marginalizing the colonized through discourse that can be understood by only the culturally elite. This means post-colonialism should help the oppressed regain power, dignity, and self-worth. It should include everyone's voice, not just the elite, to understand and fix the harm caused by the colonialism. So everyone should have the access to learn what happened during the colonization. Last one, post-colonialism is radical not only its words and life-changing power. This statement just simply implies that postcolonialism often expresses radical ideas in words but may not effectively translate those ideas in tangible things or ideas ng mga pinagsasabihan mo, life-changing actions or outcomes. In other words, while it may advocate for significant changes, the impact on people's lives might be limited or insufficient. Can academic discussion assert these critics bring any change to subaltern cultures and their peoples? Well, for me, yes. Academic discussions can create change in subaltern cultures by raising awareness and giving voice to marginalized groups. But how much change happens depends on the factors like how easy it is for people to assess academic ideas and whether those in power are open to listening. It is an ongoing conversation that needs anyone's participation and commitment. So if it's go it, when it talks about colonization or you were going to discuss it, nabibilang lang yung tao, yung ibang tao, yung ng mga nabibilang lang yung mga pwedeng maka-access nun kasi hindi naman lahat nakakapasok sa school or hindi naman lahat is willing to learn or even yung mga upper class na tao, yung mga marginalized na tao is hindi naman most of them is hindi na nga naman siya napapansin or hindi siya na-appreciate what happened during the colonization. If post-colonialism seeks to help and change the lives of colonized peoples or us, some its critics argue that its reading strategies and methodologies must be performed by those who have been colonized, not by academic living in the West. It's saying that it was truly understand and help peoples affected by colonialism. Some people think it is essential for those who've actually experienced to lead the way rather than academics, especially from Western countries. This idea stresses the importance of hearing from those directly impacted by colonization in shaping approach how we approach how we approach post-colonial issues. So, it says that mas capable yung mga naka-experience ng colonization kung sila yung makakapag-explain sa mga kung ano yung mga nangyari during those days. It is more effective kung sila mismo yung magsasabi ng mga nangyari during those time. Well, sa academic naman or sa mga universities, pagpalagay na natin sa local, is may natututunan naman ang yung mga students, may mga nagigain naman tayong knowledge, pero it hits different kapag yung mismong nakaapekto na nung mismong nakaranas ng colonization, yung makakapagbigay sa'yo ng ideas kung ano man yung mga nangyari in those days.